The textbooks, they usually give us a neat, tidy, one-sentence summary. He had a dream. And yeah, he did. But the man I want to talk about tonight? He was a lot more than a soundbite. This was a man spied on by his own government, labeled the most dangerous Negro in America, and who ultimately died fighting for garbage workers. Not exactly the Hallmark card version, is it? Stick around for the next few minutes, and I promise you'll meet a Martin Luther King Jr. far more complex, far more radical, and far more human than the one etched into our collective memory. This isn't about tearing down a hero. It's about truly understanding the fight he waged and the battles we're still grappling with today. Picture this. It's 1966, the sweltering heat of Chicago. King, ever the strategist, walks into an all-white neighborhood. He's not there for a photo op. He's there to protest blatant housing segregation, to shine a harsh light on the systemic rot of inequality. Within minutes, the air thickens with hostility, and then a rock, the size of a baseball, comes flying out of the crowd, cracking his skull. He drops to one knee, blood already starting to well and drip onto the pavement. But he doesn't stay down. He pushes himself back up, dusts himself off, and keeps marching. No cameras capturing the raw, brutal truth. No national holiday being planned. No perfectly packaged, I have a dream soundbite. Just a black minister, refusing to blink, refusing to back down, even when faced with pure, unadulterated hatred. That moment, that visceral, painful resilience, is the real entry point to his story. A story far grittier than the one we usually get. Martin Luther King Jr. grew up in Atlanta, nestled within the powerful embrace of Ebenezer Baptist Church. His father, a formidable preacher in his own right, often joked that young Martin could recite scripture by age 5. You could say spiritual leadership was in his blood, but his mind was also exceptionally sharp. He skipped 2 grades, a testament to his intellect, and entered Morehouse College at just 15 years old. There, he wasn't just hitting the books, he was absorbing the profound philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence, internalizing it, almost like a second gospel, long before he ever had to wield it in protest. By the time he was 26, life seemed to be settling into a comfortable rhythm. He was a newly minted PhD, having earned his doctorate in theology from Boston University. He was married to the brilliant and steadfast Coretta Scott, and they had a baby girl, Yolanda. He'd accepted a quiet pastorate in Montgomery, Alabama, a seemingly peaceful post that promised a life of academic pursuits and spiritual guidance. He probably imagined a scholarly path, perhaps writing books, raising his family. Life felt, well, settled. That is, until a seamstress named Rosa Parks decided to say no on a city bus, igniting a spark that would change everything. December 5th, 1955. Montgomery was buzzing, a nervous energy crackling through the black community. Rosa Parks's arrest had lit a fuse, and the community had voted to boycott the city buses. But a movement, especially one this bold, needed a voice, a leader. They needed someone who could articulate their grievances with conviction, someone who could inspire unity without seeking personal glory. They needed a leader who could speak well, yes, but who wasn't after headlines. Almost by accident, or perhaps by divine design, they picked the kid preacher, the newcomer with the resonant voice and the somewhat funny formal name, Martin Luther King Jr. That very night, he stood before a packed church, the weight of a community's hope resting on his young shoulders. He delivered a speech that wasn't just eloquent, it was a rallying cry, a moral declaration. "We are not wrong in what we are doing," he proclaimed, his voice echoing with righteous indignation. "If we are wrong, the Supreme Court is wrong." The clapping that followed wasn't just applause. It was an affirmation, a release, and a promise. It lasted 5 minutes, a thunderous roar of support. The boycott itself lasted 381 days. Think about that. Over a year. Carpools were organized with military precision. People walked miles, their feet blistering, their resolve unbroken. King's own home was bombed, a chilling reminder of the constant danger. Yet through it all, he never backed down. The community held fast, demonstrating an unwavering commitment to justice. Finally, after more than a year of walking, of sacrifice, of enduring threats, the U.S. Supreme Court outlawed bus segregation. Just like that, the 26-year-old pastor was no longer just a local leader. He was suddenly the face of a burgeoning national movement, thrust onto a stage he never sought but was uniquely prepared to fill. The Montgomery victory was just the beginning. In 1957, King understood the need for a sustained, coordinated effort. He helped form the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, a powerful coalition of Black churches across the South. These weren't just places of worship, they were hubs of community organizing, ready to pray, ready to march, and crucially, ready to vote. The SCLC became the backbone of the nonviolent direct action strategy that would define the movement. Then came 1963. The movement turned its gaze to Birmingham, Alabama, a city so entrenched in racial prejudice it earned the grim moniker, the most segregated city in America. King and the SCLC launched a campaign designed to provoke a response, to expose the raw brutality of segregation to the entire nation. And provoke it they did. Kids, some as young as 8, marched downtown, their innocence a stark contrast to the ugliness they faced. Police Commissioner Bull Connor, a man synonymous with repression, unleashed snarling police dogs and powerful fire hoses on national TV. The images were horrifying, undeniable. King himself was jailed during the campaign. It was from the confines of that Birmingham cell that he scribbled in the margins of newspapers what would become one of the most profound documents of the civil rights era, the letter from Birmingham jail. It wasn't polite, not by a long shot. He didn't mince words, directly calling out white moderates who prioritized order over justice, accusing them of being more devoted to order than to justice. He issued a chilling, timeless warning: justice too long delayed is justice denied. The letter, smuggled out and circulated worldwide, became a moral compass for the movement, forcing a reckoning. And it worked. Birmingham businessmen, facing national condemnation and economic pressure, finally caved. The humiliating whites-only and colored segregation signs came down. August 28, 1963. 250,000 people, a sea of humanity, squeezed together before the majestic Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. They had come for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a monumental demonstration of unity and purpose. The sun beat down relentlessly, and by the time King, the final speaker, approached the podium, the crowd was wilting, exhausted but expectant. As he delivered his prepared remarks, a powerful voice cut through the air. It was Mahalia Jackson, the Queen of Gospel, who had been sitting behind him on the platform. She leaned in and whispered, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." And in that moment, King pivoted. He pushed aside his prepared script, looked out at the vast crowd, and launched into an improvisation that would forever be etched into history. "I have a dream." His voice, already commanding, swelled with hope, painting a vivid picture of a future where his children would not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. The speech was a masterpiece of rhetoric, an anthem of hope and possibility, and it aired live on all 3 major networks, instantly becoming a touchstone. Pollsters reported that by the very next day, an astonishing 94% of Americans could identify its key phrase. It was a moment of profound national unity, a vision of what America could be. But here's what the highlight reel often skips: the uncomfortable truth shadowing that triumphant day. That very same night, FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover, a man consumed by paranoia and a deep-seated fear of Black leadership, penned a chilling memo. In it, he branded King the most dangerous Negro in America and promptly tripled the FBI's surveillance efforts against him. The dream was soaring, but the shadows were lengthening. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. 2 years later, in 1965, the world watched in horror as marchers attempting to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, were brutally beaten bloody by state troopers on what became known as Bloody Sunday. It was a sickening display of violence, but it also galvanized the nation. King, ever the strategic leader, led them back 2 weeks later, embarking on a 54-mile march to Montgomery, this time under the protective gaze of federal troops. The outrage, the perseverance, and King's moral authority forced Congress's hand. 5 months later, the landmark Voting Rights Act was passed, finally guaranteeing Black Americans the right to cast their ballots without fear or hindrance. But victory, King quickly learned, often came with a fierce backlash. As the movement shifted its focus, a new kind of hypocrisy emerged. Northern whites, who had cheered on the integration efforts in the South, suddenly slammed King when he dared to bring the fight for equality into their own neighborhoods. He answered their resistance with direct action. To expose the systemic economic injustice woven into the fabric of northern cities, King and his family rented a slum apartment in Chicago. He lived amidst the rats, the leaky ceilings, and the exorbitant 200% markups on substandard housing, shining a spotlight on the daily indignities faced by millions. The rock that split his skull in Chicago? That was just the warm-up. White crowds, furious at the perceived encroachment, waved swastikas and chanted chilling slogans like 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. The hatred was palpable, even more intense than what he'd faced in the South, he often said. King left Chicago with little more than a token agreement, a stark realization dawning on him. Civil rights laws, while crucial, meant little if the bedrock of economic injustice remained firmly in place. The fight for true equality, he understood, had to extend beyond legal segregation to confront the deeply rooted issues of poverty and economic exploitation. By 1967, King's vision had expanded far beyond the initial scope of civil rights. He delivered his electrifying and deeply controversial Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church in New York. In it, he didn't just criticize the war, he denounced his own government, boldly declaring it the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. It was a radical, almost unthinkable stance for a leader who had previously enjoyed widespread mainstream support. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Major newspapers, many of whom had once championed him, now denounced him as misguided or even a traitor. Public opinion polls revealed a shocking truth. 72% of Americans, and even a significant 55% of Black Americans, opposed his anti-war stance. Funders, fearing political reprisal, dried up. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act into law, felt personally betrayed by King's outspoken criticism. But King, driven by a profound moral conviction, doubled down. He launched the Poor People's Campaign, an ambitious and truly radical initiative aimed at uniting a diverse coalition of the nation's most marginalized: poor whites, Chicanos, indigenous peoples, and Black Americans. Their demand was bold: a $30 billion anti-poverty package from the government. To truly understand their plight, King moved into a tenement in Newark and toured Appalachian shacks, witnessing firsthand the devastating effects of poverty. He argued passionately that racism, poverty, and militarism weren't isolated issues. They were intertwined triplets, systemic evils that corrupted the soul of America. The media that had once lionized him now openly questioned if he had lost his way, unable or unwilling to grasp the expansive, revolutionary scope of his evolving dream. April 3rd, 1968. Memphis, Tennessee. Rain lashed against the roof of Mason Temple, a furious storm mirroring the unrest brewing outside. Lightning cut the power, plunging the cavernous hall into momentary darkness. King stepped to the pulpit, looking utterly exhausted, the weight of the world visibly etched on his face. He spoke for 43 minutes without a single note, his voice weaving a tapestry of hope and foreboding. He recounted the bomb threats on his flight to Memphis, the constant shadow of death that had followed him for years. He imagined begging God for a long life, for more time to finish his work. But then, almost prophetically, he heard himself saying, "But I'm not concerned about that now. I've seen the promised land." He paused, his voice trembling with emotion, with a premonition that sent shivers through the crowd. "I may not get there with you," he declared, "but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." It was a farewell, a prophecy, a final charge to his people. Sitting down, he quietly wiped away tears, perhaps knowing, deep in his soul, that his journey was nearing its end. The very next evening, on April 4th, a single .30-06 slug ripped through his right cheek as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. He was 39 years old. The dream, for him, had ended. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. Within 48 hours of his assassination, 125 American cities erupted in flames, a furious expression of grief, anger, and despair. Congress, terrified by the unrest, scrambled to pass the Fair Housing Act within a week, a piece of legislation King had fought tirelessly for. It was a victory, yes, but one born from tragedy. and it only scratched the surface of his deeper challenge. King's more profound ambition, closing the gaping chasm between civil rights and economic justice, remains, tragically, a check still bouncing. Think about it. Today, the racial wealth gap isn't just persistent, it's wider than it was in 1968. Voting rights, once secured at such a high cost, are again under siege, systematically eroded in states across the country. And militarized policing, a symptom of the very systemic issues King fought against, continues to haunt the same streets, disproportionately affecting the same communities. The sanitized King, the one safe for postage stamps and holiday speeches, the one who only said, "I have a dream," is easy to celebrate. But the real King, the radical King who declared, "We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values," the one who challenged capitalism, militarism, and racism as interconnected evils, that King is still too hot for our textbooks, too uncomfortable for our collective conscience. So, if you remember one thing after this video, let it be this. Justice is never a single speech, never a single law, and certainly never a finished product. It's the long, often unglamorous grind of ordinary people, refusing to quit, refusing to settle, day in and day out. King's life, his sacrifice, asks a question he never got to answer. Will we keep marching when the cameras are gone, when the rocks are flying, and when the dream feels not just distant, but impossible? If you want more stories that peel back the bumper sticker version of history, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below. What present-day issue do you think King would take on first if he were here today? And please, share this video with one person who still thinks his dream ended in 1963. Let's keep the march moving.